Hi everyone. So today we are going through day one of 4.2, and today's focus is going to be on quadratic equations and finding their roots by using the method of completing the square. So first up is just going to be a review on how to simplify square roots. So just a reminder on our list of perfect squares, of course it goes on beyond this, but these are the most commonly used ones. The method for simplifying a square root, you want to separate a square root into two different roots written as a product, with one of those roots being the largest perfect square that's going to divide the number evenly. So let's look at some examples. So first we've got the square root of 175. So what I want to find out is the largest perfect square that's going to divide 175 evenly. So 25 is the perfect square that will divide 175, and it becomes the square root of 25 times the square root of 7, because 25 times 7 is 175. Then simplifying from here, the square root of 25 is 5, so your answer becomes 5 square roots of 7. For the next example, we've got the square root of negative 44. Now, because I'm taking the square root of a negative, I know that this is going to be an imaginary root. So I'm going to start by branching off to my perfect square, square root of 4 times the square root of 11. Simplifying, the square root of 4 is 2, and then that's where the I comes into play. So because it was a negative number that we were taking the square root of, we want to make sure that we have that I indicating that it was an imaginary number. So 2i times the square root of 11 is how this one would simplify. Last up, we've got the square root of 294. So the largest perfect square that'll divide 294 is 49. So this separates into the square root of 49 times the square root of 6, and simplifying, it becomes 7 square roots of 6. So we're going to be using that a lot when we use the method of completing the square. And here's the steps. So step 1, we are first going to get our quadratic into the following form. So we want our x squared and our x term on the left, and then we want our constant on the right-hand side. Sometimes when our a value is something other than 1, we'll need to divide through by that a value. So we'll divide both sides by a. After this, we are going to figure out what our b value is, so the coefficient on x, and we're going to find both half of our b value and then whatever half of b is, that value squared. And we're going to use those two numbers to write this in our perfect square trinomial format. So here's what it's going to look like. So on the left will be our perfect square trinomial. And then on the right-hand side, we'll just end up having a number over there. And you guys will see through some examples what that's going to look like on the right-hand side. So here's our first example. I've got x squared plus 25 equals negative 8x. So the first thing I want to do is to move the x's off to the left and move that constant off to the right. So in one step, I'm going to be adding an 8x to both sides and subtracting 25 on both sides. So here's my result after moving those two terms. After I've got this in the proper format to complete the square, I'm going to find a couple things. First, I'm just indicating that my b value is 8 because that's the coefficient on my x term. Next, I'm going to find out what half of b is. So in other words, 8 divided by 2, which is 4. And then I'll be taking that value and squaring it. So my half of b squared, or in other words, 4 squared gives me 16. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that value, that 16, to write the quadratic on the left as a perfect square trinomial. So here's what that's going to look like. So I added that 16 to the left And because I added it to the left, I also need to add it to the right in order to keep things balanced. So now on the left-hand side, I have a perfect square trinomial. And on the right-hand side, that's just going to simplify to a constant. Factoring the lefts, here's the trick. So we already found this value of 4 when we did half of our b value. So when we did our 8 divided by 2, we got 4. So that left-hand side is going to factor into an x plus 4 squared, because what it would end up being is an x plus 4 times another x plus 4. So this is our shorthand way of writing it. Then on the right-hand side, that -9 is coming from just doing the -25 plus 16. So once we're in this format, we're going to solve for x. So we're going to square root both sides. And remember, whenever you square root both sides, you have to remember plus or minus the square root. The square root of -9 is 3i. So x plus 4 is going to be equal to plus or minus 3i. Then the last step is to subtract the 4 over to get x by itself. So our final answer, x is going to be equal to -4 plus or minus 3i. So those would be our 2 roots of our quadratic. Here's our next one. We've got 3x squared minus 45x minus 20.25 equal to 0. First thing I'm going to do is move my constant over. So I'm going to add the 20.25 over to the right-hand side. There's the result. Now, this one, I've got an a value that is not a 1. I've got a 3 as my a value. So my next step is to divide everything by 3. So here's the result from dividing both sides by 3. Now that I've got x squared minus 15x equal to 6.75, I'm going to find my half of b. So -15 is my b value, divided by 2 is -7.5. Then I'm also going to find out what that value is squared. -7.5 squared is 56.25. So the 56.25 is the value that will complete the square to make the left-hand side a perfect square trinomial. So here's how we would write the perfect square trinomial on the left. So I'm adding that 56.25 on the left to give me a perfect square trinomial. And then I also have to remember to add it to the right-hand side to keep my equation balanced. Rewriting the left as my perfect square trinomial, the minus 7.5 is coming from this step here where we took our b value divided by 2. Okay, so that goes in the parentheses. And then on the right, 63, that's coming from just simplifying the 6.75 plus 56.25. Our next step, we're going to square root both sides. And remember, it's plus or minus the square root. So we've got plus or minus square root of 63. That can be broken down into the square root of 9 times the square root of 7. So fully simplified, we would get 3 square roots of 7. So here's what it looks like now. X minus 7.5 equal to plus or minus 3 square roots of 7. My last step to get x by itself is to add the 7.5 over. So my final answer, my 2 roots, x is equal to 7.5 plus or minus 3 square roots of 7. All right, here's our last one. We've got 4x squared plus 12x equals 3. So my constant is already on the right-hand side. So I'm going to leave that 3 where it's at. But my a value is not a 1, it's a 4. So my next step is to divide both sides by 4. And here's the result. Now that I've got this simplified result, I'm going to find half of b. So 3 divided by 2 is 1.5. And also that value squared. 1.5 squared gives me 2.25. So 2.25 is the number that's going to complete the square on the left which will give me a perfect square trinomial. So on the left, there's the perfect square trinomial. On the right, I made sure to add on that 2.25 to the right-hand side as well. Rewriting the left as my perfect square trinomial, I get x plus 1.5, the quantity squared. So there's the 1.5 from taking half of b. There it is in the parentheses. And on the right-hand side, we're getting that by doing 0.75 plus 2.25. Plus or minus the square root. Square root of 3, that's as simplified as we can get it. We're just going to write it in exact form as the directions say. So we're not going to estimate it. We're going to leave it as the square root of 3. So then the final step to get x by itself is to subtract over the 1.5. And our final answer, negative 1.5 plus or minus the square root of 3. All right, so that is it for completing the square. So after you're done taking your notes on this lesson and going back and reviewing the steps if you need to, your task is to complete just the homework problems that are on completing the square for now. And we'll take care of the quadratic formula next time. So that's it. Email me if you've got any questions, but hopefully that was good enough for you to have good solid notes today. So have a good day.